Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 35th episode of Sports Speak. My name is Tim Moore,
And I'm Eddie Kalegi.
and today we have a lot to talk about on this Friday afternoon. So many things have gone on in the sports world really, sports isn't to an extent really going on. I mean, yes, there is the NFL, but no NBA in season, the MLB season over. However, it creates a lot of exciting news to look forward to. Today, we're going to cover NASCAR, the championship last week. Chase Elliott picking up his first championship in a race that was pretty entertaining. We have the MLB Awards that just happened yesterday. Guys like Trevor Bauer getting his first career Cy Young. Of course, we have NBA rumors such as Russell Westbrook, for example, who we'll talk about later. And, of course, our picks. But first, Eddie, let's cover our SEC. I'll tell you what, I'm going to start with my first surprise, and I'm going to be honest. Jose Abreu winning the MVP, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but to me, it was a surprise. Now, yes, he played all 60 games. He had a dominant season on the AL side. But when you look at it for the White Sox, I just to an extent feel that Jose Abreu wasn't the deciding factor of why that team had success. Don't get me wrong, he had a big factor in success, but I feel like that team overall had more of an impact because of its pitching. And to say that he's the best player in the American League is really hard. You look at how the Yankees did without DJ LeMahieu. DJ LeMahieu is a big reason why the Yankees found success. They were 3-7 without him this year. And the fact that he wasn't even considered for the top two was, to me, a little bit surprising. Now, don't get me wrong. Jose Ramirez had a very good year, had his good fair share of extra base hits. But at the same time, this is what Jose Ramirez does every year with the exception of last season. He's just kind of there in the MVP talk. But at the end of the day, he's a very good all-star player, but he's not really MVP worthy. Of the three, and again, I'm not going to take away the fact that Jose Abreu played all 60 games unlike the other two, but I believe that DJ LeMahieu had more of an impact on a team, which is, for the record, why you look at guys like Mike Trout, not just because Mike Trout's a good baseball player, but it's the fact that that one player has the biggest impact for their team and their success. And I couldn't imagine the Angels without Mike Trout. We already saw what the Yankees look like without DJ LeMahieu. Jose Abreu, the White Sox, let's be honest, are going to be the same way with or without him based upon how they've gone in past years. Maybe not this year, but we shall see. Now, my expectation, I said it last week, NASCAR aspect, Chase Elliott winning the championship. To me, it's not a surprise. He had the speed. He had everything put together after a tough season last year where he got eliminated in the round of 8. He found that speed. He found that balance, and he went from the back to the front. In fact, getting into the top 10, I believe it was like 16 laps into the race. He had that car all put together. And while, yes, I didn't get to see a double burnout, he came home victorious. And by the way, Jimmy Johnson coming home 5th, which is by far remarkable. And in conclusion, well, let the madness begin. When I mentioned before the fact that really all we have left now is the NFL, the MLB offseason is going to get spicy. I can't wait to see where Trevor Bauer goes. I cannot wait to see what happens in the NBA. In fact, and I know COVID has created an insane 2020 season, but as long as it continues, I have a feeling 2021 is only going to get better. And this may be the best offseason for all sports in really our lifetime we may see here, Eddie.
Yeah, there's a lot of drama going down. So let me start with my surprise. We'll get more into all the NBA stuff in a bit, but Chris Paul rumors that he might be heading to the Phoenix Suns. Now, my surprise is not that Phoenix is going to try to make a big move because as Devin Booker gets older and continues to prove that he's a superstar in this league, he's going to want to go elsewhere. You see, all those players from that same draft class, like Karl Anthony Towns, are starting to get a little sick of the situation they're in. The Suns showed a lot of promise last year, and that's not a surprise. The surprise is that the Thunder, who did so much better than anyone expected, get rid of Billy Donovan first, and now are rumoring trading Chris Paul. I thought from the beginning, before this season even started, that the Chris Paul stay in Oklahoma City would be short-lived. But after seeing how well he did working with the younger players and how successful that Oklahoma City team was this whole season, I thought he was going to stay there for a couple of years. So I'm kind of surprised by that whole situation. But the one thing I will say, The Thunder, now they have a history of trading away superstars. They did it twice last offseason. Maybe they'll do it again. My expectation, I got a lot of things wrong back in July when we did our MLB preseason preview. But I got one thing right, and that was that Shane Bieber would be the Cy Young of the American League. I called it. I said that he was going to have a breakout season. He didn't have Kluber or Bauer there anymore. It was his time to step up. And guess what? He did one heck of a job for the Cleveland Indians this year, there was a lot of uncertainty with that rotation because you think about the whole thing early on with Clevenger and Plesac when they both, got relegated to the training team for a little bit after the COVID incident. Then they trade away Clevenger and, a lot of young guys coming up through the ranks. And the one constant all season was Shane Bieber. And I know he had a tough time in the playoffs, but Cy Young's based off the regular season. That's why Jacob deGrom got it 2 years in a row. So congratulations to him. And I called it. I think he's one of the elite pitchers in the American League. Garrett Cole's great too. But in terms of the 60-game season, Shane Bieber was the better pitcher and certainly deserves the honor. And in conclusion, I had the same conclusion as you about madness, but I'll go elsewhere. I think, with NASCAR, we're about to talk about it, Jimmy Johnson – he went out in a great way. It's really fitting for Hendrick Motorsports about the turning of the tide. Jimmy Johnson's last race is Chase Elliott's first championship because now it's official. This new generation of Hendrick Motorsports drivers are here. When you think about, 10 years ago when they had the class, four of the best drivers the sport had seen in about a decade, when you had Dale Jr., Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, and Mark Martin all on the team at once. They even had Kyle Busch at one point. Now it's a whole new generation, and Chase Elliott is ready to take on that role. Already a champion now at 24 years old. Jimmy Johnson goes out on top. He didn't win, but a fifth-place finish. His teammate wins the championship. Rick Hendrick gets to be back at the track. Jimmy Johnson said it was the first time he'd seen Rick Hendrick since March at the first Phoenix race. So it had been a long time coming. It was great that they were able to get him back at the track to celebrate. Really great father-son story with Chase Elliott now winning a championship. But Hendrick Motorsports has to be really excited. They get Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson is probably going to be the only person in history who in a span of the year goes from getting blackballed from a sports league to ending up with a better ride or, team or whatever in any sport, better opportunity that he previously had. He's in a great spot. Alex Bowman proved himself, and like you said, was so close to making the Final Four, did everything he needed to do, and just couldn't get there. And William Byron finally got that first career win. He's got to step up a little bit, but I think he's got it in him to really take on a big role heading into 2021. The one uncertainty is sponsorship, Ally going to Bowman. We don't know what's going to happen with William Byron in terms of sponsorship because Liberty University, there's a lot of sketchy stuff right now with that, but I think there's a lot to be excited about and optimistic about at Hendrick Motorsports.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism that you should have for the future. Again, I think, the expectations for Kyle Larson are going to be sky high. I think, though, if you put the expectation that he wins more than 3 races next year, that's a little bit too much, but expect success. And I think he's in a great situation. You have to remember, and drivers already proven this. I guess you could say Alex Bowman's a little bit of an anomaly, but when you take a year away from the wheel in terms of a cup car and you have no, ride time or seat time, even in the lower series, sometimes it takes some time to adjust. So I think if Kyle Larson starts off a little bit slow, and I'm not saying he's going to finish outside the top 20, but if we're not seeing him, up to par to start next season in particular right away, I think it's because of the fact that he missed a quote unquote year, even though he was doing dirt racing, but he has to readjust because a lot of things in terms of the aero package changed last season. Obviously, we're going to see a whole different one next year, which is a whole new game. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot of similar things that change, particularly for this year, that carry over in the next season. And rounding out that point, you look at Hendrick as a whole. And again, Chase Elliott getting that championship, he's going to be that guy that everyone looks to now in Hendrick. But the big thing about this for Rick Hendrick is that you can't let this set up basically the failure that happened when you move into the next generation of vehicles. Because if you remember, about 10 years ago, there was so much success found by Rick Hendrick with both Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon that they were so good in the Gen 4, Gen 5 cars that once they got to the sixth generation, they kind of faded out a little bit. There was such a focus, such a success that they faded away. And Hendrick, let's be honest, has not been really relevant in the past few years until now again. Sure, Jimmy Johnson won a championship 4 years prior, but they hadn't been really winning races because they weren't able to understand this generation of car. We have to remember that with the next generation of vehicles coming in 2022, there is a focus on the future, but it has to be emphasized on that because if you focus on the present and what is now, Hendrick may regress again. And that's not what I'm hoping for. But for the 2021 season, they're going to be lights out again, in my opinion. It's just a matter of how do they get themselves together moving forward. They have the talent. They're the team to look forward to, just like how Gibbs is, for example. But it's how they put themselves together in the long run. But I want to move on to the next topic, and MLB Awards. You talked about Shane Bieber earlier, Eddie. And, again, I mentioned about the AL MVP voting. Well, I guess we'll start with the MVP voting. Both Freddie Freeman and Jose Abreu pick up MVP, AL, NL. And if I'm not mistaken, no, you went with Joey Votto. If we made our predictions, I'm pretty sure earlier on.
Yes, I went with Joey Votto, and then you went with Edwin Encarnacion to win the AL MVP.
Yes, but if I'm not mistaken, I did say Freddie Freeman as my NL pick.
Yes, you got that.
I got that right.
Yes.
So you get a Cy Young, I get an MVP. Now, don't get me wrong, Freddie Freeman has had an incredible year, and I am so happy for him to win MVP. But man, does he not sting, or I should say, should it sting for Braves fans? He comes home as MVP, but you don't have the World Series. You don't have the trip that they've been fighting for. While, yes, it is progression, Freeman continues to get older. And the fact that he doesn't have a ring in his pocket, it just really stings a little bit.
Yeah, but let's be honest here, Tim. For Braves fans and Atlanta fans in general, they're kind of used to that. Think about the 1990s with the Braves. Think about all these years where the Falcons have been good and, will lead by 25 in the third quarter of the Super Bowl and still can't win a championship. Freddie Freeman certainly earned this MVP, and he's certainly a leader on this team. But, heading into the offseason, the Braves are in a spot where they need to make something happen. One thing to remember, too, the Braves did play a lot of postseason games. And in a shortened season with no fans, the teams that got revenue from playing in those postseason games, and the Braves go in 7 games with the Dodgers, that goes a long way this year, more so than other years, especially with so many teams scaling back. And in their division, the Braves cannot be complicit and just stay there this year, because I talked about it with Zoe on here last week. The Mets, Steve Cohen's going to spend money, and he's going to spend money in a big way. The Marlins now getting themselves set, and after how well they did in the 60-game season, Don Mattingly getting Manager of the Year honors, they're in a position if they can, if Derek Jeter's willing to spend and make a couple of moves, they can be right in it. We know the Phillies with Bryce Harper and Rhys Hoskins have the potential to be really good, and they were finally getting things together at the very end of the shortened season. So in 162 games, they could be really solid. And the Nationals, I know they won the World Series 2 years ago. This past year, not so good. But remember, they still have Juan Soto, who is emerging as one of the best players in baseball, and they still have Strasburg. They still have Scherzer. So the Braves, they cannot just sit there, because I'd argue all 4 NL East teams are on the rise from what they did last season. So the Braves are going to have a lot more competition. But anyway, off that tangent, congrats to Freddie Freeman. He certainly earned it. Mookie Betts was really good this year, but I think Freeman was a little bit better. And I think they got that one right. The one I'm a little confused about, you talked about it. I just want to respond to your thing earlier. Jose Abreu. I don't know, because, there's 2 schools of thought that come when it comes to the MVP. There's just the best overall player. and not necessarily how they impact their team, just the best overall player. Jose Abreu was not the best overall player. And then most impactful to their team. I'd argue he was not the most impactful to his team either, because the White Sox were really a collective effort this year. You mentioned how the pitching came together. Their bullpen was really good. And Jose Abreu, while maybe he was their offensive leader, they had Eloy Jimenez. They had Luis Robert. They had Tim Anderson. They had a lot of players that were stepping up and carrying this team in a big way. I still think I would have given it to Jose Ramirez if I was in that position, because I feel like he took on a bigger role in Cleveland than Jose Abreu did in Chicago, and both those teams were about identical records. So that's where I'd go, honestly. But Jose Abreu, it's nice to see, because you remember how touted of a prospect he was when he first came over, and he was really good at the beginning, but he started to fade away, and people were kind of forgetting about him like last year, 2 years ago. But now, in a 60-game season, putting everything together, getting this AL MVP, he's got a good chance here. And, if Tony La Russa doesn't get any more DUIs, this White Sox team has a real nice shot at finding some success in 2021.
Yeah, they do have a lot of success, but I do want to go back to the NL voting for one reason, and actually has nothing to do with Freddie Freeman. But there is one thing that really did surprise me yesterday, and typically when you think about the NL MVP voting, you wouldn't think about the term controversy for anyone outside of the top three. But when I was looking through, the stats and the points and such, how does Ryan Tepera get an MVP vote over Jacob deGrom? I don't get it. Well, first off, what are you feeling about that? Because he had an average season. I think it was a 3.94 ERA, something like that. He didn't really have a good year by any means for the Cubs. But he gets an MVP vote over a guy like Jacob deGrom, who, let's be honest, had an impact for the Mets this year.
I know, but once again, there are certain people out there who will not vote for people for awards unless they're on a really good team. I think there's people who have withheld against Jacob deGrom for that reason. There are people who have withheld MVP votes for Mike Trout for that reason. And remember, you have all fringes of baseball writers voting in this. So you're bound to get a couple, I'll say, strange votes thrown in there. Personally, as a Mets fan, but you know what? Impartially in general, Jacob deGrom played a huge role on this Mets team, because he was one of two starters on this Mets team the entire season that could be trusted. Him and David Peterson, that was it. And deGrom was all reliable once again. And people are saying his ERA was higher than the last 2 years. Well, actually, 60 games into each of the last two seasons, this is actually lower than where he was at. So he was trending, and the same way with his strikeouts and with his wins, he was trending to exceed all three of those stats if it was a full 162-game season. So that's my thing about Jacob deGrom. I'll get a little fired up when we'll talk about NL Cy Young, but regardless, him over Ryan Tepera easily for an MVP vote. But I don't know. Tim, you're always going to get these weird votes that are thrown in.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to go through all the names real quick that, in regards, that actually got one more vote than Jacob deGrom on this list. Devin Williams had a very good year, 22 outings, under 1 ERA, and for the record, should have been considered, obviously not MVP numbers considering only 20 outings, but worthy. But then again, I mentioned Ryan Tepera. You have Dansby Swanson, Ian Happ, who batted a 258 this year, Max Fried, Will Myers, who I forgot he was in the major leagues, if I'm being honest, for the Padres, Brandon Belt, and then you get up to the real voting, in which it starts with Paul Goldschmidt. The fact that everyone below Goldschmidt, with the exception of, I would say, Devin Williams, even got considered, it scares me, because it makes me question the people that are voting for most valuable player, if I'm being honest. Because if you are telling me that Ian Happ this year was a top 15 player in baseball, I have to ask you what you're looking at. DeGrom easily had more of a value. There's a lot more pitchers that have value for their teams this season on the National League side. And the fact that a player that had a mediocre season gets more consideration, it's almost like you're putting a pick in for your favorite team at this point.
I don't know if you remember this from a couple years ago when Yelich beat out Bellinger. And there was an interview with Dave Roberts. I think it was on Mad Dog Russo's show. And he discussed how he thinks that part of the reason Bellinger lost was because of anti-big city bias. And when you really think about it, other than Mike Trout being so overwhelmingly good, and then they had to give it to DeGrom 2018 and 2019. There's been a lot of MVPs and, players on the Yankees, the Mets, the Dodgers, and the Angels who do not get the consideration that they deserve in these voting. And that's because a lot of the Midwestern beat writers and columnists who vote in this do not like those teams because think about the budgets that they have compared to anybody else that they're able to bring in these players. And it's almost, a better story if someone like a Christian Yelich, who the Brewers got kind of by surprise in a trade for a couple decent prospects from the Marlins and has turned into an MVP player and one of the best in baseball, I think that plays a role. But there are beat writers who voted for their favorite team. And the one thing also to remember, because some of the beat writers like Anthony DiComo and John Heyman, they post on Twitter afterwards who they voted for. It's not just one person. They vote for 10 people. So Ryan Tepera was probably 10th place for someone. Like for DiComo, he had to throw a Met on there, and he threw Dominic Smith on in 10th place because he said he was very impactful, which is true because Dominic Smith was, third in the National League in RBI for a while, and he wasn't even playing every day. So, but that it's always going to happen like that, and I think that's just the way the process goes. But I think they definitely got NL MVP right, and AL MVP, they only had one of two routes they could have really gone.
Indeed, and of course, Dom Smith, big for him as well, having a good year, at least getting some credibility, even though it doesn't really come as a top 10 result. But speaking of Dom Smith and the Mets, Eddie, obviously, you being a Mets fan, have to feel pretty optimistic now that Steve Cohen is taking the reins. First off, what's your first reaction from the press conference that we saw on Tuesday?
Well, I'm really excited about the press conference. I'm really excited about him on Twitter. He's been active over there. He's bold. He said that he's going to be disappointed if there's not a World Series title in Queens by 2025. It's a little high expectations, but you know what? I have more confidence from 2 hours with him and Sandy Alderson than, the last 20 years with the Wilpons. Now, the one thing I will say, because there's people like, why is he bringing in Sandy Alderson? He was there. He made some dumb moves. He did make some dumb moves, but also he was working on this fixed budget and was really going under the Wilpons' control. He has never worked for a team where he's been able to spend money because he's worked for the Mets and he's worked for the A's. Now he finally has the opportunity to do what he does best as a general manager and make moves and not be worried about the price. That's why he had to go after people like a Jay Bruce, who was kind of over the hill at that point. Now they can go after the big free agents. I still think Trevor Bauer's coming to the Mets. I have a pretty firm feeling about Bauer and Real Muto being the two moves because Cohen specifically said in the press conference they want pitching, they want catching. The bullpen was actually not as bad as it has been last year. Edwin Diaz actually figured things out. I know we give him a lot of hate, but aside from 1 or 2 games last season, he was pretty solid out of the bullpen. Jerry's Familia did not have a terrible year. Seth Lugo, when you put him in the bullpen, he's good. When he's a starter, it's a little rocky, but keep him back in that bullpen role. Betances, once he's healthy, I think he can be important. Justin Wilson's coming back. He was a solid lefty out of the pen. That's already 5 guys. You could bring in a couple more relievers, obviously, to mix things up, try to get a little more higher velocity guys in there in the back end. But regardless, that's a good framework. Starting rotation, you can't guarantee that Syndergaard's going to be back. I know he's already throwing, which is a little crazy because, what was it, March? It was right around when the pandemic first started that he got Tommy John surgery. I don't know how quickly he's going to be back because the last time the Mets had a pitcher coming back from Tommy John, he missed 2 full seasons. That was Zach Wheeler, and he missed 2014 and 15. So don't know what to expect there, but now Stroman's coming back. DeGrom, if you bring in Bauer, how about that 1-2-3 with Syndergaard ultimately coming back at some point? David Peterson established himself as a good starting pitcher. And then 5th starter until Syndergaard comes back. You can try to bring in, a down on the market, older guy. I know they haven't had much faith in, success with that with Porcello or Waka, but, there's always the chance. And, they love giving opportunities to Steven Matz, so maybe he'll start again. But overall, I'm very excited about this. It's not going to be immediate all of a sudden. I don't think next year all of a sudden they're winning the World Series, but I think they're going to become much more respectable. And most importantly, you're going to have a lot of transparency now from the higher-ups in the Mets organization and just less of the chaos, less of, Jason Vargas trying to attack a reporter, less of Brody Van Wagenen lying about Rob Manfred giving him directions about a protest. Those just stupid things that have been happening the last couple of years, you're going to have less of that because we don't know how much Steve Cohen knows about baseball, but we know he knows how to run a business. And when it comes to running a business, you can't have all that those stupid distractions happening. And I think he is going to do a great job keeping control of that.
Yeah, I'm really optimistic to see this offseason what kind of signings the Mets make. You look at the situation around the team, and I was talking about it yesterday with a couple of people about, the Mets trade 2 years ago for Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz, for example. If you really look at that trade, yes, right now Mets fans are regretting it a little bit. But at the same time, it's still actually a steal when it's all put together. Yes, you lose the number 11 prospect in all of baseball right now, but at the same time, the players that they gave away haven't had any success since they've left. If they turn around to be somewhat stars, then yeah, maybe we'll reevaluate the future. But when you look at it, I still think that trade was a win for the Mets. And without that trade, to be honest, I think Steve Cohen would have had less to work with this offseason than he does. You have a lot of options at Robinson Cano. I know Cano hasn't played well, but at the same time, I still think he has one good season left in him. What do you do with Jeff McNeil? If they can find a way to bring in, for example, DJ LeMahieu, then that's going to be really scary. But you mentioned Trevor Bauer. I think Trevor Bauer in New York in general, rather if it's Yankees or Mets, is a must. His media is top-notch, and you mix that as well with what his goals are and aspirations, he will definitely fit into the Mets system with Steve Cohen. And again, you already mentioned it. That 1-3, really that 1-5, and I'm still bought in, to be honest, about Seth Lugo being the starter. I don't know about you, but I know Lugo had an average ERA-wise last season, but at the same time, it really didn't feel like he had that bad of a year. He was effective in the closer role when he got his opportunities. He was effective out of the pen. I still think he's arguably the best, if not second best reliever on that Mets team. And I know you're giving me a little bit of a look.
Well, you know what? Listen, I'm not going to disagree with you that he's one of their best relievers. He is. But when he was in the starting rotation, there was a game against the Phillies where he allowed 6 straight hits to start the game. There was another start, I believe it was against Atlanta. He only made it 2 innings. Those were back-to-back. The reason his ERA was slightly inflated was because of the games that he had to start because everybody was hurt. When he was in the bullpen, he was really good. I feel like he's kind of fit into that role as that reliever, that super reliever that they can throw into any situation. But I don't know how much faith I have in him as a starter. But you mentioned I don't know what they're going to do with the fifth starter. If they sign a second pitcher, because I think they're definitely signing one pitcher. I'm 99% sure it's going to be Trevor Bauer. But even if they don't get Trevor Bauer, they're signing some sort of starting pitcher. And you pair that with DeGrom and Stroman and David Peterson. And until Syndergaard comes back, you're going to need another guy in there. So maybe they throw Lugo in. Maybe they give Steven Matz another chance. I don't know. But personally, I'd rather, experiment with another type of Michael Wacha or a Rick Porcello because they have their bright spots. I'm not saying bring one of them back, but I'm saying, a guy that's kind of faded away, not someone who led the entire American League with the highest earned run average like Porcello, but somebody who's kind of floating under the radar, a Lance Lynn type of guy that you bring in there and can kind of provide some veteran leadership and some stability. And my only concern about the Mets rotation, if they bring in Trevor Bauer, is that I feel like there's just going to be a lot of chaos because you're going to have, I'd argue, the three most outspoken starting pitchers in all of baseball on the same team: Stroman, Syndergaard, and Trevor Bauer. That's a lot of hotheads. And then when you've got, Jacob deGrom never says anything. His social media, his most recent post was 2 years ago that he went to Costco with his parents. He's not going to be a problem. But if you've got all three of those guys, I just feel like that's a tumultuous situation bound to happen. And that's when you need leadership with a manager. And my one thing was Sandy Alderson hinted that Luis Rojas is keeping the job into next year. I feel like, I know maybe it's not fair to only judge him off of the 60 games, but I don't know when you bring in all these superstars if someone that laid back is going to work. I know in other sports like the NBA, think about Tyronn Lue, some kind of letting the players play, but baseball is different. There's more of, I think, a hands-on aspect and where the manager has to be able to, have that tough love relationship with the players. Luis Rojas just felt sort of distant. So I don't know, despite how much, the homegrown guys like him, like Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, I don't know how he would fit with bringing in a bunch of free agents. I don't know how that would work in a 162-game season.
Now, one last question before we switch topics. It'll be a simple yes or no. Do we see the Yankees moving on from Gary Sanchez during this offseason?
Yes. I think Kyle Higashioka is going to become the catcher. I don't think Gary Sanchez has a place on this team anymore.
So you do not believe the Yankees will try to get a Yadier Molina or a JT Realmuto, who, let's be honest, I think, and I agree with you, is going to find his way in a Mets uniform?
I still personally, I know he's taking calls, but I'd be shocked to see Yadier Molina leave St. Louis. So, he's been there for 15 years. He just has fit so well with that team. I don't see him or Adam Wainwright leaving St. Louis before they retire. I really just don't. I know there's rumors, but I don't know. I think the Yankees will bring in some sort of veteran backup catcher. I don't know who it would be. Honestly, I could see them maybe go for the Mets. The Mets let 3 veteran catchers all walk. Ramos, Rivera, and Chirinos. I could see the Yankees grab one of those guys, especially maybe a Wilson Ramos, because he's still got pop in his bat, and you could throw him in as a DH once in a while against a lefty, and he could make a splash, and he's a good backup catcher. So I could see them doing that, but I don't see Gary Sanchez coming back to the Yankees.
Yeah, I can agree with that in regards to the Yankees. I think the underrated signing they need this year, obviously, yes, they need a catcher, but I want the Yankees to get Nelson Cruz badly. He still has pop in his bat as well. At the age of 40, I think he could fit well as a DH. But then again, you have to then expand Giancarlo Stanton, which, let's be honest, who knows if the Yankees can do that with keeping him healthy. But now I do want to switch topics, and that's the NBA. A lot of rumors going on. And first, I suppose, let's start with Russell Westbrook. I was reading an article this morning, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been seeing a lot of rumors about potentially Westbrook, not obviously leaving, but going to the Knicks. Just why? Why? I don't get it. Why the Knicks? You want to escape the place, not go to the worst place in the world.
And here's the thing with Russell Westbrook. I don't know what he wants because there's the superstars who, they're all friends. Originally it used to just be LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Carmelo, but most of the superstars are all friends these days, and they want to build their teams with 2 to 3 other superstars all together on one team. And then there's the guys like Jimmy Butler who just want their own team and to be able to be the star and have a supporting cast. And both ways have proven to work in some ways in the NBA. I don't know what Russell Westbrook really wants because he's not as much of a recruiter as some of the other point guards in the league, like a Kyrie Irving. But, he's been on 2 super teams now before, supposed super teams, and neither of them have really panned out the way they were supposed to. I know the Thunder made it to a championship, but they couldn't win that championship. And the Rockets this year, I know they made it to the second round of the playoffs, but that was a disaster. That was not a good year. Now the GM's gone, the coach is gone, and now Russell Westbrook might be gone. Now him to the Knicks, I don't see why, because the Knicks, who had their big free agency, which was to get Julius Randle and Elfrid Payton, there's not a good direction with the Knicks. I know Tom Thibodeau, at least you have a veteran coach in there, but I don't have faith in the Knicks being much better than they've been any other season. I think there's better destinations. I completely understand him wanting to get out of Houston, but I think there's better places he could go than to the Knicks.
Well, let me ask this question when it's all said and done. Obviously, Chris Paul has had that reputation of being a quote-unquote bad teammate. But now this makes me start to question, is Chris Paul really that bad of a teammate? Or is James Harden really that bad of a teammate? Because to me, it just doesn't make sense that Russell Westbrook, who, by the way, played with James Harden for a good little bit, and has a pretty good team around him, would want to leave that situation. And sure, maybe he doesn't see an upside in Houston, but let's be honest, what upside is there being on a team that loses by 60 every single day out there on the floor? The Knicks aren't good. There is no future in New York. Yes, I'm sorry, there is future in New York in terms of the Nets, but it's not like the Knicks have anything working for them. I feel like there's a better option, even if it's a bigger franchise. And I'm sure there are teams that are good or have a 1-star that are looking for a second star that are willing to make a deal. But to make a big marketing decision, it doesn't add up to me because that's not Russell Westbrook's MO. He wants to be competitive. He wants to win. There's something here that just doesn't make sense to me. And to me, it just feels like maybe it goes back to the fact that maybe players just don't really get along with James Harden.
Well, or like I said with Russell Westbrook, does he want a situation where he can be the star? Because, maybe I was a little hard on the Knicks. There is some promise. There's a veteran coach. You do have R.J. Barrett coming back for his second year. Mitchell Robinson, Julius Randle. I know it's small, but there's things there. Now, I think you are fully correct in saying about James Harden, because also just think about the 2 superstars he's played with since he went to Houston, Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook. How much did you actually hear about Chris Paul when he was with the Rockets? Harden was the face of that team. This year, Russell Westbrook, who, think about how the media covered Russell Westbrook every day. Another triple-double for Russell Westbrook. He's going to pass Wilt Chamberlain. That's how it was when he was in Oklahoma City, even when Paul George was there. This year, with the Rockets, you really didn't hear anything about Russell Westbrook because Harden is the focus. And it's not just that because of the media. It's also because of just how they play on the floor. These are 2 point guards. Yet Harden kind of crosses over from being a 2 running the point. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of situations where James Harden is a ball hog. He is. Think about those games where he goes 2 of 16 from 3-point range. I don't care how good of a 3-point shooter you are. I don't care if you're Klay Thompson. You shouldn't be taking that many if you can't make them that day, especially when you have other people you can work the ball around too. And that's not something you pin on Coach D'Antoni. That's something that James Harden himself has to work the ball around. And I feel like he's had a history of doing that ever since he's assumed this stardom in Houston. Yes, when Harden is hot, he's a great player. He's one of the best in basketball, but I don't know how great of a teammate he is. And I talked about those cliques that have formed between superstars. James Harden is a very reserved guy. He is not part of those cliques. Something else that I want to mention that I feel like kind of, I don't know, in a weird way kind of fits in. When you look back at the bubble and all the players having the social justice statements in the back of their uniforms, there were certain players who did not. There are certain ones like LeBron James that I feel like kind of took it to the approach of, you remember the thing with Michael Jordan? Did you watch The Last Dance when he talked the whole thing about Republicans wear shoes too, and the thing with Nike or whatever, they wouldn't go against the candidate? I think LeBron James kind of did it in that way because, there are people who are opposed to that movement, and LeBron James, a businessman, wanted to be careful. James Harden, on the other hand, I don't think it was for that reason, because that's not the type of person James Harden is. I just don't think he's involved with that inner clique in the NBA. And you don't see him really out there being an activist. You don't see him being that social with the other superstars. You don't really see James Harden being that recruiter that you see a LeBron or a Kyrie or a Kevin Durant being. And I mean, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but that's what causes people like Russell Westbrook or Chris Paul. Obviously, holding the ball a lot also kind of hurts, but I think that's part of the reason that James Harden really is kind of forgotten about in a way, and he tries to take control himself instead of taking advantage of the resources he has, and that's why the Rockets cannot get past the second round.
Yeah, and for Houston, this has got to be a little bit rough because, again, you mentioned, I mean, the constant failure after failure after failure. It can only happen so many times. And yes, you have to change something up. But at the same time, this move, the last offseason, felt like the big move that Houston needed to get better. And to be honest, they did play better this year, but when it mattered in the bubble, they couldn't get it done. So if they trade away Russell Westbrook, I really hope they get something good in return. But if they continue to be the way they are, again, it's on James Harden. And really, James Harden dictates that future. But that's not the only issue that we've been seeing in terms of this NBA free agency period, as well as everything else in this off season. And there's another pretty big story before we get to the Chris Paul story, and that essentially is Victor Oladipo. He's had a lot of drama going on as well. I believe it's with Miles Turner, and I could be incorrect.
Yeah, so there's that. And then a thing from Bleacher Report the other day that supposedly post-game, in games against the Nets and against Atlanta, he came up to players and said he wanted to play with them next season. Now, this is when the NBA becomes a little hypocritical because remember when Doc Rivers was an analyst for part of the playoffs 2 years ago and starts talking about how Kawhi is a good player and they fine him for tampering for that? Yet Victor Oladipo's not getting anything, and he's just going over to other players and telling them he wants to play on their teams next year. But that's besides the point. The point is, Victor Oladipo, he proved he came back from that bad injury, and he proved that he's still a really good player, and he'd be a great piece. Personally, I think he'd fit really well in Brooklyn, because Brooklyn needs another wing player that they can throw in there, especially if Joe Harris doesn't come back. And can you think about a lineup of Irving, Oladipo, LeVert, Jared Allen, and Durant? Like that is huge. I think he could fit really well there. But the Pacers, once again, are another team, kind of like the Rockets in a way, that just cannot get over the hump in the playoffs. And I don't know I think they're still a while away from being super competitive. And it's even worse for the Pacers because at least the Rockets, you kind of credit it to how good the Western Conference is and how tough that is. The Eastern Conference, the Pacers have been losing to some teams and being destroyed by some teams that they should be a little more competitive with. I mean, the Heat were a better team this year, but that should not have been a 4-game sweep. The Pacers should have been able to keep at least some semblance of control and at least take one game. The fact that they got swept, not a good sign in Indiana. They've had too many coaching changes, and I don't think that's a place where Oladipo can really succeed.
And indeed, and for the record, for the Pacers of late, still the most memorable thing they've had is Lance Stevenson blowing LeBron James's ear. So, I mean, to me, don't get me wrong, they've had a big turnaround, they've found success, but they're just one of those teams that, like, for example, the Raptors were for a good little bit, Eddie, were just stuck as that middle of the barrel team. They're in that 4 through 8. They're just kind of there in the playoffs, and they find their way, eventually moved out the first or the second round. I feel like Brooklyn would be a big landing spot for an Oladipo because, again, the Nets, let's be honest, not being able to bring back D'Angelo Russell has really, really hurt them. So the fact that they can bring in Oladipo and have essentially a big 3 could be huge, but at the same time, it may not be realistic. If I'm not mistaken today, Oladipo said that now as a resort statement, I guess you could say, he wants to stay in Indiana, keep all his ties happy. But I have a feeling he's going to get traded. And to be honest, it's funny, you were mentioning about Chris Paul earlier, about potentially going to Phoenix. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Oladipo going to Phoenix, because I feel like if Indiana is going to trade him, it's going to be to a place that he doesn't want to go, because of the simple fact that they don't like the actions that he's taken. And it's, again, as you mentioned, hypocritical and not really professional.
100%. Like, when a player is speaking out, especially in this way of going up to other teams and telling them you want to play for them next season, the management's not going to be too happy. So I can certainly see that. But you mentioned the Suns. I just want to touch on that. I talked about it at the beginning, but I think it would be a good move for Phoenix, 100%, because, they need a point guard that can kind of draw attention away and get Devin Booker open, that Booker doesn't have to do everything himself. And we saw the promise from this team in the bubble, 8-0. I mean, they were so close to making the playoffs, and who knows how far they could have gone. They've been on the low budget side of things, yet they've been able to find some really good players like a Kelly Oubre and Aaron Baines, who have postseason experience and have fit in well to that team dynamic. They're not, the run the ball up the floor and shoot Suns that they once were under Mike D'Antoni years ago. They've controlled things a little more now, and I think that different approach and a good coach in Monty Williams, that they could be a very solid contender, and I think Chris Paul could really help them out.
Chris Paul definitely could help them out. And I think that, again, as you mentioned, I mean, they need something to help Devin Booker. Because let's be honest, if the Suns at this point, after all the years of quote-unquote tanking, if you don't get something together here, you're wasting Devin Booker's career, and you wasted all the potential that they've set up. I mean, let's be honest. The Suns, until this past season, were nothing for about 5 or 6 seasons now. And it seems like that they're starting to get things in the right direction. But I almost get that feeling that if they don't make this trade, if they don't make a move, if they don't make this team better, then there's going to be no point, and they're going to go back and reconstruct everything again. So I feel like for Devin Booker, obviously, as a career opportunity, it's a must to get another player that can help him out. But at the same time, I think it's a must for Phoenix to find some more depth off the bench as well. I think that's one thing that really hurt them last season. And let's be honest, this is a team that I think is capable of making the playoffs. They just need a little bit more help. And getting Chris Paul is the first step that ultimately sets them forward. So I'm going to ask you this question, I guess. If they do get Chris Paul, do you see the Phoenix Suns being a playoff team next season?
Definitely a playoff team. I think they will. Now, how much will they compete? I don't know, because Lakers are the defending champs. Warriors are healthy again. Clippers are still going to be good. Houston, no matter what semblance that team is still going to be very competitive. Dallas, I mean, there's too many good teams in the Western Conference to really pick. I mean, seriously, the only bad team I'd say in the whole conference is Minnesota. Everybody else has some sort of promising sign to them. 14 teams that are, you know what, actually no, I forgot Sacramento. I'd throw Sacramento in there too. But 13 of the 15 teams, I think, are playoff caliber teams, which is huge. So I think that the Suns can do well. I think they can maybe grab a playoff spot, get in as an 8 seed, but with how tough the Western Conference is, I don't know how far they'd actually go.
Well, if they make progress, I think that's the most important part. But again, first, I suppose let's see if they make a trade. But let's move on to our final topic of the day. It's not really, I shouldn't say a topic, but rather our picks for this week's pick'ems. Last week, Eddie, you had a pretty good week. If I'm not mistaken, now you sit one game above me.
Yes, I do.
Last week's results. We had gone back and forth, it seemed like splitting and being stuck in a little bit of tie throughout the first 8 weeks. However, now we're well past that midpoint of the season, and we're closing in towards the playoffs. A lot of these games now start to become meaningful. And if I'm being honest, we can really start to paint the picture for majority of the teams except for the NFC East. What do you I mean, what are you first off expecting for this week in NFL in particular before you give your picks?
Well, it's one of my picks. I think Tom Brady's going to bounce back in a big way. He's had a lot of trouble against New Orleans this year, but other than that, they've been solid. Bruce Arians attributed it to night games. They're not preparing as well for them. And when you think about the 3 night games they've had this year, 2 losses and barely beating the Giants. So in the daytime, they've been amazing. So I think they're going to turn it around. I think that they're not one of my picks, but I think Buffalo's going to continue their hot stretch. Nice win over Seattle last week. The Seahawks, I think, will bounce back against the Rams. It's a big week for them. And then just watching what goes down in the NFC East. Giants and Eagles are matching up again. That's going to be big. Weird thing, it's week 10. And after this, the Giants only have one more divisional game. They play Dallas one more time, which is kind of weird with, 7 weeks, 6 games, and only one of them is in division. But, that's actually a big game, and the Eagles got to take control. If they can win that, the Eagles might actually secure themselves as a pretty solid front runner to win the NFC East again. And the Houston Texans, I mean, I knew they were going to – I said in our preview they were going to take a little bit of a step back, but I did not think they would be struggling this much. I mean, the Jaguars are the only team they can beat this year. It's very concerning. And to think about how everybody touted the week 1 matchup against the Chiefs, maybe we'll see this in the AFC Championship. Well, we're way past that, and we're way past the Texans having a 28-10 lead in the second quarter against Kansas City in the AFC divisional playoff last year. So those are some of my expectations. Let me get into my picks. First off, I mentioned it. Carolina's coming off in a nice game. Teddy Bridgewater had a solid game. They almost beat the Chiefs, but no Christian McCaffrey. He was just ruled out with a shoulder injury right before we started this. So I'm going with Tampa Bay. Buccaneers controlled the Panthers back in week 2. I think despite being on the road, Tom Brady's going to have a good game. And my one little bonus prediction, I think Antonio Brown gets back in the end zone this week. I think, Tom Brady was thrown at him. He was well covered against New Orleans. But I think they're going to be able to find Antonio Brown and connect for his first touchdown of the year. Second game, I got the Bears over Minnesota. Minnesota started to turn things around, but if there's one thing, the 3 givens in life are death, taxes, and Kirk Cousins struggling on primetime games. And I think that's going to happen again. Monday Night Football, I've got faith in the Bears defense to really suffocate Cousins and the Bears to win that one and bounce back from their loss to the Titans. Third game, I think this is the most given, Packers over Jacksonville. Will Luton was actually pretty good as the quarterback for the Jaguars on Sunday, but I think this is going to be the Packers and Aaron Rodgers rolling in a big way in this one.
Yeah, the Packers also still trying to find their full momentum and force since losing to that Vikings team. And, the way I look at it, Rodgers did a good job bouncing back. Obviously, no one expected Dalvin Cook to go off 2 weeks ago and have, literally the best 2 weeks I've seen in football in terms of a ground game. If I'm not mistaken, over 412 yards, I think it is, in the last 2 weeks alone. So he's been on fire. And if you're a fantasy owner, you're going to be pretty happy. But that Packers team is still, in my opinion, the best team in the NFC North and only going to get better. And for the record, the Vikings, they continue to play their offense, they're only going to get better. But I'm going to go with the AFC side first, and I'm going to start with the Cleveland Browns over the Texans. The Texans, they've been embarrassing this year. J.J. Watt soon will probably want out of Texas, let's be honest, because this Houston team is almost, it feels like, tanking. And the Browns, they've been effective this season. I know they don't have Odell because of that torn ACL, but Baker Mayfield against a somewhat weaker defense has an opportunity to really make something happen again. Every chance he's had an opportunity, except for the big teams in the AFC North, he's found a way to get it done. I think they dominate Houston today, or I should say on Sunday, and I don't really expect much offense, if I'm being honest, for Deshaun Watson's team. Now, I'm going to make a bold prediction. I'm 2-0 predicting them this year. I'm going the New York Giants over the Philadelphia Eagles. I need the suffrage to end, Eddie. I need a 3-0 start, and I need the Giants to not blow a football game against Philadelphia. I'm still cringing after Monday night or whatever, Thursday night, whatever they played and lost. They had a sour taste in my mouth. But the Giants have one thing positive going for them. They come off a victory. The last time they came off a victory, yes, they lost, but they played well against two. Philadelphia. Yes, they beat the Redskins. I need them to turn around and play again strong against Philadelphia. And there is one thing to mention as well. As scary bad as this division has been, the Giants have had one thing that's been consistent all year long, hurting the NFC East quarterbacks. They have destroyed Dak Prescott's ankle. They have now destroyed Kyle Allen's ankle. I'm not hoping an injury to Carson Wentz, but following the statistics, I would not be surprised if Carson Wentz goes down with an injury.
It's week 10. We're already bound for Carson Wentz to get hurt eventually this season. And, get it over with now. Maybe not have to deal with it in the playoff game and bring in Josh McCown. Maybe not that again.
Well, yeah, you don't want to hope for, again, injuries, but based upon the statistics and this being, let's be honest, the worst offensive line as a Giants fan, I would never imagine saying that. But because of the injuries, this is arguably the worst offensive line in the NFL. And Leonard Williams, who, by the way, has played very well for the Giants, could get his hands on Carson Wentz and make it a little bit of a threat. Now, had you not picked that the Buffalo Bills over the Cardinals, that offense has been surprising for the record at 400-plus yards last week for Josh Allen. I would have went with them. But I'm going to go.
Well, I didn't pick that as one of my games, Tim.
No, saying had you not picked them, I would have went with them.
Oh, well, you still can.
I'm saying I would have went with them had you not picked them. But yeah. I'm going to try to go with the Magic. Tua Tagovailoa. I have him beating the Los Angeles Chargers. It has to happen. 2-0 for the Dolphins since they've started. Let's be honest. This defense, the free agent signings they've made, have worked to perfection. Now they face the Chargers, who have a solid defense. And really, I know the Chargers only have 2 wins this year. But at the same time, let's be honest. It hasn't been Justin Herbert that's been the issue. it's really been their inability to close out games when it matters. I think the Dolphins have been better this year when it comes to that, and I would like to see it. Two rookie quarterbacks that have had the most talk in terms of what their futures look like. Tua and Herbert, it's going to be exciting. And really, I wish it was Sunday Night Football this week. But arguably, that's America's game of the week to watch. And again, that's why I have Miami taking it over the Los Angeles Chargers, Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, Dolphins have been surprisingly good. And if Buffalo, Buffalo's got to be careful here because the Dolphins are knocking on their door for the AFC East lead. And Tua's been solid. The Dolphins overall, Gaskin and other players, they have a solid offense. Their defense has been great this year. And the Chargers have been such a good team too. It's crazy. They have 3 games this year where they lost as time expired against Denver, against Las Vegas, and against Kansas City. They've lost a divisional game to each of the 3 opponents in their division in the final seconds. And they played Tampa Bay tough. They played New Orleans tough, and they haven't won any of those 5 games. So really frustrating for them, but I agree with you. I think the Dolphins are going to win this one.
The Dolphins get one of the most exciting teams right now in the AFC, and let's be honest, who would have expected them to be competing not just for an AFC East title, but potentially competing for a playoff spot after having a terrible, terrible season? And, we thought that with them benching Fitzmagic after what's been a magical start for him would have created disaster. Tua's lived up to the hype. He's done a good job protecting the football, and he's done a very good job. And I'm very optimistic in the year of 2020 to see as the year obviously carries over towards 2021 to end the year, if the Dolphins can keep it going. But it's only week 10 of 17. No one knows what will happen unless, of course, you play in the AFC West. Because let's be honest, the Kansas City Chiefs are walking away with that division. Every other division, though, is still within reach. No one knows who's going to win the NFC North. The NFC East, again, as I already said, the worst division there can be. Someone's going to win it, unfortunately, and someone's going to have to draft 20-something because of it. But the matter is that we still don't know who's going to win that division, and we don't know who's going to win the NFC West. It's been back and forth. The Seahawks defense has really fallen apart. The Cardinals have played somewhat well, and they're still there to compete. The AFC East, again, 50-50. Who knows right now? It's between the Bills and the Dolphins. The AFC North, well, let's be honest. Okay, maybe Pittsburgh has that one still on a walk away, but the Ravens have still been strong, and the Browns are still that third wheel there. And the AFC South, well, we'll get to that when we get to that. That's still interesting between the Colts and the Titans. I also forgot to mention the NFC South, in which now the Saints have made things especially interesting with the Bucks, and now going to the final division, of course, the AFC West. Again, I mentioned that really being the only quote-unquote landslide in which I really think you could figure out who's going to win their division. But that's going to wrap it up for the 35th episode of Sports Speak. I'm Tim Moore.
I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And you've been watching Sports Speak. We'll see you next Friday for more talk. And, of course, this week, we didn't talk NASCAR, but that's for a good reason. We'll talk more about it next week. Have a good one, folks.